There it is. There's the red light. Corey Petty, Bitcoin Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Woo! So, social implications of blockchain infrastructure. What does that mean? What's the point of that? I want to give you somewhat of a different viewpoint from a infrastructure standpoint, how these computers are put together, and when we build on things like that, what that means. So first off, why should you even listen to me? Who am I? My name's Corey Petty. I have a PhD in computational physics. I'll tell you why that's any relevant to this whatsoever in just a little bit. But I currently work for Booz Allen Hamilton in an innovation lab called Dark Labs. They have tasked me with trying to find the intersection of blockchain and cybersecurity, or figuring out new ways to fix cybersecurity in industrial control systems with blockchain, or even the vice versa. What can blockchain do to help? So what can cybersecurity do to help fix maybe some of what blockchain problems have? As opposed to my PhD work, I did a lot of quantum mechanics calculations on massive supercomputers. And what that means is what you optimize for when you do these things is communication. That's the bottleneck of how big of a problem you can do. And when we think about blockchain systems and these networks that we talk about, that's a pretty good analogy. And so while I was doing my work, I learned about Bitcoin through I think it was a TED talk about what is money. And it was interesting. So I dug in, and through this same scenario we've all been through, fell down the rabbit hole and kept going since about maybe late 2012. When I was doing a postdoc, me and my co-hosts who were in the audience started the Bitcoin podcast, which has grown fantastically over the past 3 years into a network of shows where we try and educate people about what we do, what this thing we call blockchain is going to end up being, where it came from, how it works, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this talk is certainly not investment advice. I'm not selling you anything. This is not some subscription service you apply to and can't get out of. This is not an ICO that I've previously gotten into that I'm going to tell you about, so hopefully I make some money. It's just a different viewpoint. I want to give you something that you probably haven't heard before because I haven't found it. And it's kind of some information that I've gleaned over the years of trying to figure out what it is that we're doing or what it is that we're trying to build and fix. So, the core idea of this, and what I think it all boils down to, is that good technology enables new or more efficient human communication. Because at the end of the day, we're all just humans trying to communicate. And when we develop newer and newer technologies, we're just trying to do that better, more efficiently, faster, or newer. And so when we try to evaluate these things, why is it doing this? What is it doing that makes us do whatever it is we want to do better, faster, or newer? So keep this in mind. We're going to come back to it later. I want to start by introducing you, if you haven't heard of it, you probably have, what the client-server infrastructure model is. This is the way we've built the internet. This is what has enabled all of the things that we do, the live streaming, these computers, talking people online, chat systems, Facebook, you name it. Whatever has made your life better so far, it's because of basically the client-server infrastructure, how these computers talk to each other. And what it is basically you have a server where you keep all of your information. And if you would like to access that information or interact with it, the data itself, you then access it. You have a client that's lightweight that calls out to the server, gets its information, calls back, you change it, you talk to the server. If you want to talk with someone else on that application, you go through that server. And it has certain implications on how you interact with things. When you build an application, when you build some service on top of this computer infrastructure, it forces you to act a certain way. Some consequences of this is that you adhere to the trust constraints. You're trusting this server. You're making sure that if you give it data, which it manages and you change, so on and so forth, through whatever application you're using, you're trusting that they take care of that data. You're trusting that they're not selling that data. You're trusting a lot of things. But what you're doing is you're putting a lot of trust into someone else. We'll talk about what that means here in a little bit. But what you're also doing is, regardless of who you're communicating with through whatever service you're using, you're restructuring the relationship that you'd like to have with whatever that application is providing you with. So if it's an intimate relationship, you better hope they're not selling your data or looking at your messages. If it's financial relationship, you better hope they're not selling that type of thing. It doesn't matter. You just have to trust them, and there's no other option. Sometimes this comes at a severe cost of the relationship. There's certain things you don't want to do online because you have to trust someone else to hold the data or the service that you're doing. And for those who are actually holding this data, they're beholden to the custodianship and the responsibility for the protection of that data. You make massive honeypots of information that they have to then spend large and large amounts of money to try and protect so that we don't have security leaks, although we're going to have them anyway. So as we've scaled this kind of idea out, we keep building more and more client-server applications and models, and the internet grew and grew and grew to what we know it is today. It's done a lot of really wonderful things for civilization, but in a sense, this is how it looked. You had client-server application, talks to other client-server application. Say maybe a user on this application wants to talk through someone over here. They have to go through these interconnections. Servers talks to servers, so on and so forth. This isn't perfect, but it generally gets the idea across. It then gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And slowly but surely, this is what we have. This is everything that a child was like maybe born in 2000 understands. This is the way they understand social communication of the internet. Think about that. This has, what kind of human does this make? If everything we do that enables our communication and we rely on, these phones that are now become so pivotal in our lives, what kind of human does it make? What kind of social implications do you start to think about if it's just the background noise of what you do or what you know? You drastically increase the reach of things. You can talk to someone across the world in no seconds at all. But you also offload a lot of the responsibility, and this becomes normal. Oh, I had a problem with this person that I bought something with. It doesn't matter, the bank will take care of that. I don't have to worry about storing my passwords. I can always secure them because the server has it. If I ever have an issue, someone else is going to take care of it. You grow up in a civilization where offloading responsibility is standard, and that's an interesting social consequence. You also have data hoarding. The people who enable these services for us, they don't make money off you interacting with them. They make money off all the data you give them, and it's incredibly valuable. Your identities, your digital identities, are not yours. They're whoever has them, and they make money off of that. There's a trade-off of information and convenience, right? If you would like to use these services to make your lives better, you're going to give away some of your privacy, some of your convenience, so on and so forth. Machine learning requires data. If you would like some type of really, really cool bot that understands that you're going to have an event in 2 days that asks you to remind you about it, you need to know more about your personal life. So there's a trade-off there. And there's a real big centralization of value that becomes large honeypots for people to go after. So if we think about this in terms of a linear scale of trust and trustless, we've built the entire internet system on a completely trusted situation. So think of it of a pendulum attached to a string, right? And then blockchain came along and didn't like this model. They understood that. But they were very ideologically aligned to say, do we need trust at all? What happens when we build a computer network system that can't have trust? It's 100% trustless. What does that look like? What does that do? So we built a blockchain, right? Now this is some version of visualizing what a blockchain works. I'll walk through it a little bit because it's confusing and hard to visualize. So you have this network of nodes, networks of people that are running different types of software, all running the same software that follows the same rule set. Maybe there's different roles in these people, but they're all following the same rules. And one person in the system wants to talk to someone else. He says, I'm going to broadcast a message. So he broadcasts a message to the whole network, and you end up with just a pool of messages of saying, declaring, I'm going to do this. It follows the rules. That's it. But these rules don't really care about whether or not they're capable of doing it. In Bitcoin, the rule is I'm giving money from this person to this person. If you have the money in your account, then you can give the money to someone else if your addresses are valid, so on and so forth. So they're not very restrictive. As long as you follow the rules, you can do whatever you want, and no one can stop you. Validators, which are somewhat promoted members of the system, then take all of these messages together, aggregate them up, and then put them in a block. The method in which they do that is called mining or consensus, depending on what system you're using. We can talk all day about that, but that's the general idea of what's going on. I want to do something, I'm broadcasting it, someone checks to see if it's following the rules, it gets recorded into history immutably so that everyone has a copy and can see that. So when you do something, everyone can see it. What kind of person does this make? What does it mean if for a child who grows up in a world where everything is trustless, everything is permissionless? Is that a world we want to grow up in? It has a lot of other social types of consequences that are both good and bad. It puts the responsibility of the individual solely in their hands. You can no longer offload responsibility if you live in a completely trustless environment. If you lose your private key, your money is gone. If someone steals your wallet, your money is gone. I'm talking in a financial aspect here. You can't offload the responsibility of dealing with your things to someone else because it's your responsibility. There's nothing else you can do about that. Now you can start to then use third-party services as custodians, but you're trusting someone. That's not completely trustless, and I'll get to that here in a moment. But you're also spreading the value distribution. If you take someone's note off, if you hack an exchange, you don't break the system. You can't take the whole thing down by taking a single part of it. It'll adapt. You spread out the distribution of whatever value is in that network well or better. It's all relative. Because all of the data, all of the value is held at the end nodes, the people who are using this network, the people who are trying to build on top of this network focus on actually providing service through transit. They're going to transform your money. They're going to give you something you can do that just makes it a little bit convenient, but they're never holding the data. They just transform the data and move it somewhere else. And when you're building applications on something like that, that's how you make money. You don't hold it for people, because in a trusted environment, they hold their money, or whatever value it is. Furthermore, you have a very large-scale agreement on information, as opposed to the client-server model. I'm not going to back up. You keep that in your brain. Data on one application maybe doesn't correspond to the same redundant data on another application. So when you have things like a consortium of banks, you have to have a lot of middlemen, which have to keep track of who has what, do a lot of auditing to make sure no one's cheating each other. In a trustless system like blockchain, you have one central source of truth. Everyone checks it, everyone trusts it. So we've gone full tilt the other way. We've created a new system where you can build things where there's responsibilities on the other end of the spectrum. It's completely trustless, but do we want to build a new internet only on this? The internet that we made is on one system. We had one option. You had no other option. This is another one. But in reality, it's going to be everything in the middle. When you think about, and this is kind of where I think we are now, I'll get to that in a moment, but in the beginning, you've changed the way you interact with people based on the way the computers work together. You changed the social interaction to the tech. We didn't like the trusted part of that, so we built blockchain. You're still doing the same thing. You're going to change the way, possibly, you interact with whoever you're interacting with based on what the tech allows you to do. But in reality, I think the real switch, the real thing that's going to disintermediate or drastically change or whatever buzzword you want to use for what this technology is going to do is the switching in, instead of us changing our social interaction, our communication with other people to the tech, we're going to start changing the way the tech works based on how the interaction should work. And I think that's important. So we'll start picking and choosing of things in between this. In some contexts, trustless is fantastic. In other contexts, trusted is very fantastic. But the nuance of social communication and us as humans and what we want to do, there's now a plethora of options in what you'd like to do. So when you evaluate new coins, when you evaluate platforms, when you evaluate systems, start to ask yourself, what are they doing? What types of interactions are those people who interact on that system supposed to be doing? And how have they chosen tech appropriately to cater to that action? I think that's important. So back to this, good technology enables newer, more efficient human communication. The fundamental layer is us just trying to do stuff. We're using tech to make that better, not conforming to what the tech allows us to do. Now we actually have options. We never did before. So with that in mind, we're still very, very early. But when you have judgment on these things, it should at the very least start to think about this. How does the technology cater to the social interaction? And what does that mean going forward? How does that make us better or more efficient or new in communicating? Does it save money? Does it offer you something you couldn't do before? Is it scalable? Is it private? Do you need to be private? There's a lot of things like that you can start to then ask yourself instead of following some rubric of things you're supposed to ask on, is this going to work for how it should work? Because all of you have some type of domain that you're good at. And when you start to think about what your domain does and your expertise in that system and how to apply this stuff to it, that's how you do it. What are the constraints that a completely trusted system has? Does that work with my trust constraints of whatever my domain expertise is? Then it's probably not very good. Is there a part of it that I can implement into what I do? How does that work? Let's take a component of the trustless system and put it into what I do to make it better. So, plug. This is the Bitcoin Podcast Network. We've interviewed a plethora of people. We love people. We love communication. You can see because I talk about it. We attempt to understand all angles of this space, from the way this decentralized, permissionless money enables people to do things they could never do before, how it impacts enterprises and how they make their fish systems better. You name it, we're going to interview that people, not just CEOs or ICOs or things that are the flavor of the week. We release probably weekly at least. Well, every Sunday you're going to see a new episode from us. We have 9, almost 12 new shows coming up on the network that we release regularly. So it's just a steady stream of content. Cover it all, and we have a live Slack space where we answer questions, so on and so forth. If you're interested, bring it up. I'd love to talk to you. Long catalog, and that's it. So thank you. Any questions? I got plenty of time.
You charge to listen to the podcast?
No, the podcast is free. If you want to have access to our listeners, that's not free. So we've prided ourselves on being very authentic so that people who are interested in learning about things can learn about them without having to pay money for it. Now, I know if you charge, people think your product is better. We don't want to do that. We do it. We started it because we love talking to people. We wanted access to the people who are changing and doing things in the space. It makes us more knowledgeable. And because we're more knowledgeable, we can make better decisions on how to maneuver throughout the space. And people want that. So it's easy to just broadcast it. And then through broadcasting that and growing a community, that feedback from them has also made us better people. They've become a filter of a lot of the garbage, so that they bring us new interesting ideas that we can interact with the community, and it builds it together. So if you like to market with us, that's a fee. But other than that, it's all free. You can find us on any podcasting application.
You mentioned the quantum aspect of that. We're doing this on reactors. Can you talk about what quantum would fit into this, at least in the blockchain space, and then say like, hey, here's the internet, here's the blockchain, and then maybe take me out 20 years. What is quantum?
Okay, so quantum computing.
Yeah.
I didn't do quantum computing, but I understand it, and I was a part of the space. But don't worry about it anytime soon, right? So the reason why quantum computers are being built in the first place, very off topic, still interesting, is because they're trying to solve chemistry problems. They want to do chemistry. That's basically the hardest types of computational problems you can do right now, and you can't do them with traditional computers. And so because of that, the types of algorithms that quantum computers are trying to solve are not easily used for the brute force types algorithms we use in blockchains, hashing algorithms. So in order to break a SHA-256 hash, this is what Bitcoin uses, you would need a massive quantum computer designed to do with these types of things. And it's going to be a while because they may be growing, but they're very inefficient, they're very expensive. And if they work for something, they're probably not going to go to blockchain because there's a lot of other things that are protected by hashes. Now, that is to say, it's going to be a while, it will happen. Their quantum computers will definitely play a role in how these systems work. I think we'll have enough time to adapt. But there are unforeseen consequences that people don't talk about. For instance, like if Bitcoin, we'll take for example, needs to transfer to a quantum resistant hashing algorithm, that's cool. And then there are questions along the lines of how does everyone move their money from their old wallet address, which is not quantum resistant, to their new wallet address, which should be quantum resistant? And what about all that money that's locked up? What about Satoshi's coins? That's a significant percentage of all of the coins that have been mined. If someone can access that, because they certainly can't be moved, we assume, what does that do to the economics of Bitcoin? And how can you mitigate that type of thing? When you do the hard forks to a new quantum resistant algorithm, you just cut those out. What if Satoshi's still alive? We don't know. What if about all those coins that have just been locked up and they're not accessible for a certain amount of time because who knows what someone's weird storage mechanism was? We can't cut those people out so they're rot for access. And so things like that in terms of economics and dealing with that type of things are going to be an interesting conversation, but I think we'll have time to do it. It's not a problem we can't solve, it's just a problem we will have. Yeah. All right, anything else?
You have 5 more minutes, so use it.
Floor is yours.
You mentioned that people will conform to technology that's available, whether it's the newest or shinest thing, and that you'd like to see us change our behavior. Thanks. You'd like to see people change their behavior, maybe to ask for what they want, to get the technology. I've been in IT for almost 20 years, and I see this all the time where people have to change their process to match what the technology can do. And there's, even in business and in society in general, it's interesting now. I think we're seeing people come up with new ideas, but also people don't know what they want. Even if they're trying to challenge the newest tech innovators to come up with something new and useful, changing that behavior from pushing the limit to really change society and how you want it to be, as opposed to society conforming to what we already have.
Oh, it's difficult for
So
sure.
That's really tough. Like in 2003, I didn't know I needed an iPhone. I didn't know I wanted one.
But you
So,
have one now.
Of course, I can't go without
It's
it. So-
it's inevitable if you provide the service that does what you'd like to do. If it is a service that makes your life better, you're going to use it. I think it's just a slow process. The internet was a joke for a long time until it became useful. The Bitcoin was a joke for a long time until it became useful. It's these types of things take years, decades. Children are the way they are because they grew up in the internet. Growing up before the internet with phones on the walls, going through the process of getting it and then it becoming useful was very interesting to me to see how we've become reliant on these things. Or think about now, like when cell phones were becoming interesting and kind of available to as a consumer commodity. You didn't know you needed a cell phone, and it was like, why would I ever need a cell phone? Until you got one, and you're like, I can't live without a cell phone. But all before that, your life was fine. It's just a slow process of like, it just takes a while for it to become useful and available before it starts to change social norms. And that's going to be a real long time, in my opinion. And it is hard. And there's going to be a lot of losers who refuse to adapt. But there's money in it. And if there's money, people are going to do it. And I think now, because we have so many options, the people who make money are going to do it in a way that's good for us and what we want because we have options to choose. There's too many options. The scarcity is human attention. If you want that, you're going to do it in the right way. That just takes time.
Good time for one more if anyone needs it or wants it.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that. So are you saying that the blockchain technology and everything is, we're really in the neophyte stage at this point, and that it's gonna go on to unknown levels for years and years to come?
I think it's just going to be we have a new way of connecting computers together that building on has different constraints. So you get to pick and choose. It's just going to, like, the internet kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And now we have a new way of building a different type of internet, which will continue to grow and grow and grow. And those are going to start to marry together in new and interesting ways. And we're going to find new technology that marries together. But it's just going to be a base level. It's like the real, in my opinion, like novelty of a blockchain is just digital scarcity. Before we had blockchains, if I gave you something on the internet, you could never know whether or not I didn't have it anymore, unless you went through some intermediary that you trusted. With blockchains, it's just part of the protocol. If I give you something, you know I don't have it. And scarcity is valuable depending on what value attached to that scarcity. And when you build a network on people trying to vie for the same scarcity, it then gets value. That's where the value comes from. You can't change that scarcity. And you can trust that if you give it to somebody, you no longer have it. And no one else has to care. There's no trust involved. I think that enables you to build new types of systems, of new different ways of human communication that doesn't have a lot of intermediaries and problems, just works. And so that's just a lot of different use cases on how we want to do business, how we want to interact, how we have central sources of information that we don't need to trust. And there's just a tremendous amount of applications you can go through. It's just a way of doing it right now, as opposed to doing it because it's cool and trustless.
Great answer. Great ending point. Court Penny for the Bitcoin Podcast.